Bring me that horizon.
All right, Captain, here we go.
Hang up, me hearties, yo ho.
Hey everybody, it's Cameron here with the third episode of Framework, a film-centric podcast about films. Today we're talking about some exciting films, well, maybe just one film, but, you know, who knows? It's a conversation. Anything can happen. We're joined by somebody really special, somebody really awesome. I think you're going to love them. But before we get into it, I just have a reminder that things are changing at Framework. Small things, but nonetheless things that are important. So just a reminder that although I have said in the past that we're going to release every first Monday of every month, it's actually going to be the first of every month because not every month is the same. So some months are, the 7th might be the Monday, but we'll have it ready on the 1st. So what we're going to do going forward is a little bit different than what we've done, but I don't feel too bad about it because, this is only the third episode. But regardless, let's just jump right in. This is Framework, a film-centric podcast and YouTube show about how one frame in a film speaks to the bigger picture. So that's it. You know that already. If you're a new listener, welcome to Framework. If you've been listening for the past 2 episodes, you know exactly how this works. You know how it's going to work. And that's that. So let's just get right into it. Today we're joined by Mr. Dylan Broda. How are you today?
Hello. I am pretty good, all things considered.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have been talking a lot over the course of the pandemic, and it just so happens that today we're talking over Discord. We can't be in the company of one another, but hopefully soon. But not only because of the pandemic, but also because of proximity. Where are you calling in from today?
I'm calling in from a little hamlet known as Sarnia, Ontario, right by the border of between Canada, or Ontario and Michigan specifically, right by the beautiful sunny Lake Huron coast. Not much to it more than that. It's not exactly a film and television mecca of the world, but for the time being, it is a safe haven that I have found myself in. At least I have a microphone.
Yeah, at least you have a microphone and sort of an ability to be creative and produce your art and that sort of a thing. Dylan has been part of my life since the first year of college. I say that like we're getting married, but we might as well be. Dylan and I met in college. Dylan and I took the same program in college. Sort of a similar relationship that I have with Robin, who was on our first episode, but I haven't known Robin as long. So Dylan and I, we've been chatting about doing an episode of Framework basically since I've had the idea for the show, and I'm really happy to have Dylan on the podcast, and I hope everybody who's listening today gets something out of what Dylan has to say. So Dylan, I'm just gonna, at this point, now that I've done my reminder about the first Monday of every month, I just would love to give you the opportunity to talk about yourself, for you to talk about yourself and to tell the listeners today what exactly it is that you do and or what you want to do. Introduce yourself however you see fit, but this is your opportunity. So go ahead.
I'll do my best to carpe this diem then. So my name is Dylan Broda. I'm an emerging filmmaker, sound editor, music composer, jack of all trades kind of sort, and co-founder of a production company called Glimpse. As Cam said, I'm a recent graduate of Sheridan College's Bachelor of Film and Television program, but fret not, I'm a movie lover, not a film snob. Much of my work involves telling stories and helping others tell their stories in whatever form that may take at the moment. And it's an exciting time to be a part of the film and television and animation industry, as they're all innovating and coming together to, really advance the art in ways that we haven't seen before. So it's exciting to be a part of, especially at the ground level, especially as as a newcomer.
Awesome. That was a great introduction. I think, it's something interesting that you said sticks out with me. Just like, fear not, I'm a movie lover, not a film snob. I think that's great. I think that's awesome. I think that is one for the books for sure.
Well, so long as you don't read my essays.
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, I guess you could say the same about me too, right? I mean, you and I have maybe you more than I do, but we have a knack for the written word because also we're writers, right? So we have a tendency to just kind of blabber on and on and on about stuff, even if it's not movies, but mostly movies. But we do love movies. I mean, like we
do love them, don't we?
When you go to film school, especially Sheridan, where we were lucky enough to attend, you kind of joke and shit on people who go to university for film and they just get the theory, but they never make a movie, and then they go and do their, then they go do their certificate or whatever, and they try and make a movie, and it's a piece of shit because they never got the practical experience or the training, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, we shit on those people, but those are great people too. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, there's always gonna be like, artists and creatives and film school, people who went to film school, especially even with people who went to other film schools, just like always in competition with one another. But yeah,
the funny thing about that too is that we get shit on by the people who are in the industry because they didn't go into film school, because they're self-taught or just have the bootstrap and gumption to pick up a camera, shoot something, and get an award from it, or get merit.
Yeah, and I mean that's the thing, right? In terms of this industry, I'm learning faster now than I did when I was in school that there are so many ways in. Like it's an industry that I really do believe is guarded by so many different gatekeepers and things like that, and they make it hard for some people to get in, and at least at the ground level. I've had a lot of experience of trying to get an entry level position, and entry level doesn't mean no years experience. It means either 1, 2, or 3. But nonetheless, there are a lot of ways into this industry, and there's a lot of really great people in this industry, and they all came from different areas of other industries. So it's the film industry itself. So there are a lot of different kinds of people, and I think that's what makes the film and television so cool. And like you said, it is changing, and it is great to be at the ground level. And you mentioned Glimpse, which I co-founded with you, which is something that we're building from the ground up, and hopefully is successful. And
Eye of Ice.
and what I wanted to do. Nice. That's actually a good way. That's a good segue right there. Dylan, we're going to do a quick little summary. I'm going to do a quick little summary of the movie that we chose to talk about in Framework, and I want you to help me out a little bit. But, I find myself on a whole bunch of different, websites about movies and IMDb and all that kind of stuff. And, no summary is perfect, right? I mean, they're all more like guidelines. Right? So you got that one? You got that?
Needn't use such big words. We're not but humble pirates.
Yeah. I mean, I think by now, if you're an avid fan of Pirates of the Caribbean, you figured out that that's what we're talking about. We're talking about Pirates of the Caribbean, the first one, because in my view, that's the best one.
Sorry, I was providing theme music for you.
No, I appreciate it. That's I isolated you so that we just heard your brilliance. So here's my summary. Okay, here's my little summary. I wrote it like 10 minutes ago after watching the film. It doesn't capture everything about the movie, but it hopefully captures a little bit about it. So Captain Jack Sparrow teams up with William Turner to save the governor's daughter, Elizabeth Swan, when she is taken by a group of undead pirates led by Captain Barbossa. The movie is an eccentric adventure tale filled with action, comedy, and some romantic nuance. The film was released by Disney in 2003. The director is Gore Verbinski, and the DOP is Darius Wolski. I might have butchered both of their names, but nonetheless, that's what I've got. It's nice and short and concise, but again, it's just a summary. It's just a guideline. So, Dylan, you tell me how I did, and if you think my summary was shit, I'll let you kind of summarize some of the movie.
Well, I think that's a pretty apt summary. I mean, the movie has immortalized. It was actually a bit of a sleeper hit at first, and nobody thought it was going to do well. I mean, it's a movie about pirates at the time where pirates weren't exactly something that were cool. At least I don't think they were cool so much in the 90s. Like, what are the major pirate movies you can think of that came before Pirates of the Caribbean? I think there was the Muppets Treasure Island.
Right.
I'm not entirely sure, but I don't think... I think Pirates of the Caribbean is what, made pirates what they are today. They made them cool. They made them swarthy. They gave them an essence of true grit, which you didn't normally see with pirates. Pirates were very much a Disneyland attraction at the inception of Pirates of the Caribbean, and that's what it was based on. Like, don't forget, this was based on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disney World, or what's it, Disneyland California? I think it's Disney World in Orlando. And what a departure. And I think that I think they were a little nervous, or Disney was a little nervous to pull the trigger on Pirates of the Caribbean because they didn't know whether it would sell. And I know this is less of a summary, but it's worth talking about. They had something completely different in mind that was more closer in tone to what the ride was, which was, the yo ho, a pirate's life for me, swashbuckling and all that nonsense. Whereas Jack Sparrow was originally on paper just supposed to be a funny man, nothing more. Little did Disney know, and much to their lament later, that it would be Jack Sparrow would become the titular character of the film. Would we say he's the protagonist? No, but he is you couldn't have the film without him. He is within and without the movie. And I think part of that comes down to just what a great character he is and what a great character Johnny Depp made him to be. And yeah, we learn that even though Jack is a pirate, he is a good man. And he watching the story unfold all the way through to him getting revenge on Barbossa for essentially taking away Jack's freedom, taking away Jack's ship and crew. That was Jack's freedom. That's why Jack wanted to be a pirate. And in the process of getting his freedom back, he helped Will and Elizabeth gain their freedom romantically. And also helped Barbossa and the ill-fated crew of the Black Pearl at the time, as Jack refers to them as his crew of miscreants, saves them as well, gives them freedom from their curse. So I guess you could say the movie's really about freedom. But when you think of Pirates of the Caribbean or Curse of the Black Pearl, there are probably many memorable images that come to mind, but this one that we're talking about today, in my opinion, is one of the most fantastic scenes in early 2000s cinema history. That may sound high praise, but sorry?
No, yeah, I was just going to say that's a really good kind of segue into talking about what we're seeing, because some of our listeners might be on Spotify or Apple Music or some other streaming service where they don't get the value of seeing a picture. So, I would love, this is a good segue. I would love your help in just sort of explaining what we're looking at and what scene it's from. I believe both of us managed to watch Pirates of the Caribbean very recently, myself this morning, actually. So I've got good memory of where this is from, but I'll let you kind of talk a little bit about it because it was your choice. And then we can just dive right into talking about this image, talking about the movie, and talking about kind of where it fits and what it says about the film as a whole, and yeah, just dive into a casual conversation. So let us know what we're looking at.
Of course. Well, this scene, or at least the stellar music that accompanies it, which we'll have to touch on as well, is called the Underwater March. And if you were to distill the coolest moments from the film outside of Captain Jack Sparrow himself, this would probably be it. But actually, before we can talk about this image specifically, I think we have to cover how we got to this point, a moment which is also one of my favorite lines from the film. So, spoiler alert, by the way, for an 18-year-old movie. But after...
Oh, yeah, I forgot.
after returning to the Isla de Muerte, which literally is just Latin for Island of Death, much to everyone's disbelief, Jack manages to sway Captain Barbossa into his plan involving Will Turner as a bargaining chip. At least we're led to believe it's his plan. He could, after all, be making it all up as he goes along. But upon agreeing, Jack yells out, "To the boats!" And no one moves, awaiting their actual orders from Barbossa. But to which point Barbossa says, "Gents, take a walk." Not to the boats, nope. Take a walk. And boy, do they. So, right after that, we cut to a beautiful establishing shot of the Dauntless as the moon breaks free from the clouds above, casting this ghostly blue light onto the water, silhouetting the ship in frame around the stone entrance to Isla de Muerte. Beautiful, chef's kiss. Then we cut underwater. How do we know we're underwater? Well, there's fish, of course. Those quickly disperse, though. The skeleton crew emerges from the depths and into the moonbeams, showing us what they really are. And they're in view, but not entirely, as they walk slowly and menacing towards the camera, right up until they're underneath the ship. And for a moment, they appear human again, a glimpse of the men they once were, before emerging on the other side as this undead horde they've become. And at this point, we've already seen the skeleton's special effect in the moonlight gimmick a few times, but at this scale, in this setting, the reveal is spectacular in such impending slow motion. So that's the scene we're looking at, or the frame we're looking at. This cross section of this scene is as they're approaching us. It's worth noting, too, that the filmmakers do not use much slow motion cinematography in this movie. So when it's used, as it should be, it's used for emphasis. But not just emphasis, it's practical, too. They're underwater, after all. And when you think about the physics of it, wading through water, it's difficult enough. But imagine if you did not float, walking underwater, how slow and laborious that would be. Perhaps skeletons are more hydrodynamic, but they're still slow. But that's just it. The water cannot stop them. Not even the pressure or darkness of walking on the seafloor. So what makes these cursed pirates so terrifying, and anything for that matter, is this image of a persistent, unyielding evil. But I digress. Let's talk about this frame specifically. The first thing I like about it is the clever choice of how they've framed the pirates between the ship's underbelly and its shadow. So they're effectively narrowing the frame. Now, as we know, a good scene in any movie is one that can do multiple things at once, right? And this image is an example of something that's doing three things at once. The first and most obvious is that it focuses our attention on what is about to unfold, because they're stepping into visibility, right? It's a kind of the tree versus the forest effect. We don't see all of them, but it's insinuated rather than spelling them out that, you just see this massive skeleton pirates coming towards you in this murky blue.
And I would love to talk about the murkiness of the underwater and the great, almost the blue gradient that we see from the ocean floor to, moving up in the frame where the light is coming in through the kind of where closer to the surface, and I what I noticed from watching, not just in this frame, there, you know, I mean, it's absent in this frame, but something that the whole movie manages to do is contrast the colors orange and blue.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that is practical, right? I mean, when when you're in the Pirates age, you're kind of like you're expecting there to be a lot of gunfire and fire and all these kinds of things. So which means there's going to be a lot of orange, and then night falls and you're in sort of a more aggressive or violent scene, and the blue kind of comes with it, right?
Yeah,
and in this scene, there's no orange whatsoever. It's just the light, even the light coming from the moon. It's coming from the moon, not the sun, so it's closer to white than it is to any other orange color. So it just once again reminds you in this frame that we're with the skeleton crew, not with anybody else. And obviously reminding us that this is the middle of the night. I mean, I believe before the wide shot where the ship is framed between the rocks, we see the moon. So, of course, the moon is a reminder and a transition method that the editor uses and the director uses to get us out of the cave.
It's a great shot, and it really defines everything right there for you. And the moon, or I should more specifically, the blue light, or the blues of the film and their associated blacks, really represent the unknown in this film, and everything else is just flickering light. Besides the shots that are in the day, which are usually the more less action-heavy shots, except for the final sea fight where they end up getting marooned on the island again. But no, the blue, and especially having a frame that is just all blue, is a great way of getting us fully into the unknown at this point. Like, what is happening? We know they went for a walk. Where did they go? They start emerging underwater. It's just a great scene. And it also the establishing shot of the ship earlier, it shows us that's where the Dauntless is, and the moon is out. So there are two facts we know. And then when we're underneath, the top part of the frame that's narrowing our field of view, that is the ship we just saw. So it's a visual semantic hook, reminding us that is the ship, and they are close and getting closer.
Exactly. And I mean, you'll see that a lot in movies. It's a very common choice made normally by the director and with input from the cinematographer. It's a very common choice to make where, the edges of your frame, and I'm talking like the very edge, like where the frame ends, is not necessarily indicative of the frame itself, or represents the limits of the frame. There's usually a frame happening within the frame. In this case, the shadow at the sea floor, and the darkness of the ship at the top is creating a frame within a frame.
It is, yeah. Which at the time, it must have been something to see this in theaters. This is when widescreen was really starting to become more prominent, and they shot this in
absolutely.
Widescreen. I remember viewing this on our old cathode ray tube TV, our 4x3 box. Made the movie look terrible because it just scrunched it, and we were like, "Where's the rest of the movie? Why are these big black bars on the screen?" But the width of it does allow you to see more action, so I'm glad that movies went towards a wider view. But that's a final point too, is that creating of the frame within a frame limits our field of view, which gives us no escape visually. And they're the only area that we can look through. The pirates are approaching us.
Yeah, and when you think about it, I mean, it's very common in terms of craftsmanship and technique for filmmakers to visually convey something that the audience should feel. Not only that, sorry, visually convey something that not only represents what the audience should feel, but also what the other characters who might be off screen are feeling. So, for example, Commodore Norrington's ship, okay, how they've been duped because they're waiting at the entrance to the cave in these other smaller boats, and only a few, right, of Commodore Norrington's crew are on this ship waiting. So they've got the upper hand suddenly because as soon as they enter the ship, they have the upper hand because of the lack of Norrington's crew. So Norrington effectively has been duped, and Norrington is in these small paddle boats, and he's got nothing. He's trapped.
Yeah,
there's nothing
other
he can
than
do.
get back to the ship,
And so
yeah.
Other than get back to the ship, which they do so rather successfully, but now as an audience member, we're like,
Oh yeah,
they're
because
fucked,
as I mentioned earlier, the skeletons, or the crew, they can't die. Or I mean, later in the movie, even just a few scenes later, Barbossa says like, "You've only got one shot, and we can't die." For the slower people in the audience, that's the stakes.
Yeah. Like if you haven't figured it out by now, then you know for sure when Barbossa says it.
And that's intercutting from that scene onward back to the fight on the ship just really cements it home. But before any of that happens, them walking through this water is just the scariest thing to a sailor. It's like nothing can stop them. We can be out far at sea and they can still walk no matter how slowly towards us. It's a bit of a flex too.
Yeah.
On Barbossa and the crew's part, that they can casually just so do this because they can't die. It's as you said, they're fucked.
Precisely. There are a couple things, I want to talk about that will obviously bring us back to this image, and not all of them may be represented or in this image, or at least not to me right now, but perhaps they are represented in this image and you can help enlighten and help me see how they are. That would be fantastic. But there's a couple things I noticed from watching the film just recently. And I'll start with the first one here about shadows and physical barriers. And I think that it's going to tie in a little bit what we just talked about, because of course we just finished talking about frames within frames and how, the cinematographer has chosen to, include the top part of the ship and the bottom part of the shadow, creating focus and a frame within a frame. Yeah. And they're the only thing that you can look at. And the frame is smaller than, kind of the standard size of whatever they choose to use, 16:9 or 235 or 171 or whatever the fuck, whatever they choose to do. But so the frame is smaller than the edges of the actual camera's view in terms of what we see that's in motion. In this case, people walking towards us.
Yeah.
And earlier on in the film, there is a couple of examples of this that don't only happen underwater in blue, bathed in blue light. And I noticed that over the course of the film, there's this tendency to use shadows and physical barriers to craft the image.
Oh yeah,
we see that a lot. And one other example that sticks out in my head, if you remember, is a very important scene because it's the scene that kind of gives Jack Sparrow the idea, It's when Will Turner comes and breaks Jack Sparrow out of jail, like out of the barracks, I guess,
yeah.
Right? And he's talking about leverage, and before he actually opens the jail cell, pops it open. There's a shot from the inside of the jail cell where they're looking through the bars and they're casting a fairly dark shadow onto Will's face, right?
Yeah.
And in this case, the shadow. Exactly. And in this case, the shadow's underneath his eyes. And I've seen in some films where like the shadow actually covers their eyes, and that's a very bold choice. But in this case, it's underneath the eyes, so you can still connect with the character in a way that you desire to as the audience. You know, we want to see the eyes, right?
Yeah.
But that, you know, the casting of that shadow is so subtle, and the fact that there's this barrier, it tells you so much about where the character is and where they're going to find themselves kind of later on in the film. And then, you know, the writing comes in so perfectly, exposing later the fact that he is the leverage, as you very correctly just said, you know.
Yeah.
So it's a trend like throughout the film where where the cinematographer uses shadows and barriers to play with
and they cast shadows into the frame that reveal just enough information. That's the art of it. Just enough information so that the audience instantly gets and understands what is there beyond the obvious. And it's a very you know, we don't like to think as screenwriters or as filmmakers that we're playing mental games with the audience, but we're very much working hard to entertain you. And in order to entertain you, we have to make you, I believe it was Brad Bird that said this at a TED Talk, but you have to make the audience work for their dinner. You know, you have to give them just enough information, either in the form of audio, visual, or musical cues, or even dialogue cues, that give more information, but just enough information to keep the audience interested and wondering and invested in the story and already starting to jump to conclusions. That way, the brain is equally satisfied when some conclusions are met, and also surprised when some conclusions end up being a twist. And that also works very well in setting up everything we know about the skeleton crew of the Black Pearl. Is your brain starts to wonder, now these guys are skeletons, so what happens if they were to fall overboard? Well, they don't drown.
Yes, or for example, like, yeah, or for example, like, you know, and this very much plays out. Like, what happens if a bomb explodes near them?
Yeah.
Or inside them? Right? So, things like that.
That's part of the fun of writing good action, is basically the what if and but then. You know? Taking your subject matter, be it skeletons or an undead pirate, and adding a bunch of what ifs. What if they were underwater? What if they were caught in an explosion? What if the bomb was put inside of them while they were skeleton, and then they were pushed out of the moonlight, and now they're human again? What would happen? You know, those kind of fun questions lead to really interesting and satisfying visual scenes.
Definitely. And this is a little bit of a transition that might be into something that talks more about maybe some other scenes in the film and other frames in the film. But the visual language of this film is really interesting, because I noticed a couple things, and I actually had to pay a lot of attention to it. But you know, I really believe that the visual language hinges on something that I refer to as steady urgency. Okay. So, and I'll explain what I mean. And I mean, of course, this is very much a studio film with a high budget. So, and they've got a lot of stuff going on. They've got a lot of cast members. They've got a lot of highly involved scenes that might involve a lot of visual effects or practical effects.
Which, not to mention, the CGI at the time still stands up today.
It does, absolutely.
Albeit with much help from the high contrast, low key lighting that we talked about. That is in much of the film.
And so what I'm getting at with the steady urgency is interesting. I mean, it's not just referring to what it looks like and how they shot it, but basically how they approached production, because I feel like they approached the film in a very classic sense. Like there's a lot of scenes where, you know, there's a wide, there's an over the shoulder of both characters talking, and then maybe there's a close up and a close up of an object, and then that object is going to be a transition from the scene prior, right? So yeah. they do that a lot, and that's very classic, you know, Hollywood kind of, well, not classic, modern Hollywood. Okay, it's very modern Hollywood, Disney, and, you know, these big companies who find a way to get you in a scene as soon as possible and out as late as possible and out as soon as possible, right? But the steady urgency also applies to the visual language. And I want to talk about handheld and steady cam shots and how a lot of this stuff appears to be on a jib, okay? And how forgivable some of the handheld shots are, even though there aren't a lot. You know, yeah. And the reason that they're so forgivable is like very simple. It's because of the locale. Like they're literally they're on a ship or they're underwater. And if you've ever been on a ship or if you've ever been underwater, you know that your body doesn't necessarily control all the movement. Like you're not on pavement, right? Yeah. So that scene where Barbossa's introducing Elizabeth to the curse and whatever and trying to get her to eat, you can see how, you know, the whole table is moving and whatever.
You can see the stuff hanging and swaying in the background,
stuff like that. And a lot of that is on a dolly track or on a tripod or on a steady cam, but only some of it is on handheld. And actually, it's funny because for the most part, the camera moves without calling attention to the operator. That's kind of what I'm getting at, right?
Yeah.
And yet it still manages to generate a sense of urgency, especially in those scenes where they're being attacked or there's like a fight. There's a fight scene going on, you know. And if you've ever seen, you know, BTS of Pirates of the Caribbean, they've got these huge rigs.
Oh yeah.
You know, and the camera's kind of done. Sometimes the camera's not even on the ship, like it's around the ship, right? So have you ever seen some of that stuff? It's really interesting to think about how two things, right? Steady urgency that sound relatively opposite could be used together to create the look that you're going for and the emotion and the feeling that you're going for. So I really and only some shots call attention to the operator, and I counted 8 in the whole film that, in my opinion, call attention to the operator. And there's one that, and this is not one of them, by the way, but there's one that you might remember where at first Barbossa thinks that Elizabeth her last name's Turner, so they cut her hand and expect the curse to be lifted. Do you remember that scene?
Of course.
Then Will Turner shows up and takes her away with the medallion. And there's a shot, and the camera operator very clearly pans the camera to reveal that they're gone.
Ah, yeah.
So that's the first shot that I can think of in the whole film, or one of the only shots in the whole film, that really calls attention to the fact that there's somebody holding the camera recording. Like there's an operator, you know?
Yeah. It's almost...
but most of the film... Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's almost kind of a fourth wall break in a way. It's like
in a way,
we become a part of the crew and we look over with the rest of the crew and Barbossa and see that they're gone. So I think it works. I also think it was... I think it was necessary because the awesome set that they had for Isla de Muerta, where it was just all of this cavernous coral and all this gold and stuff, but it's all really dark in there. It's a lot of organic, confusing shapes. So it's easy. It's a good thing they had the lighting where they did, because it's easy to get very lost. And I think they felt that was an effective way of illustrating that, yeah, they're gone. Again, for the slower people in the audience, I suppose.
Yeah, and I mean, when you see Turner kind of coming up out of the water and then whatever, you sort of assume that that's what's going to happen. And so I wouldn't be surprised if the film worked without that shot. You just kind of cut to something where they're running away, but they chose not to do that, and I think that's perfectly acceptable and fine, you know. And I think it's really interesting, and this goes back to something that you kind of said right there, where how they decided to do these kind of, you know, quicker shots that call attention to the operator and sort of break the fourth wall, that are more handheld near the end of the film. Like most of these shots that I'm saying that I noticed them in the second half of the movie, where everything is starting to happen and we're starting to have more knowledge about what's in Jack's mind and how Jack kind of lied a little bit to William, you know, and how Jack sort of used William as the leverage and that sort of thing. And so, you know, to a degree, it's more fitting to have those kind of movements in the second half of this movie than in the first half, because in the first half everything is sort of settled, you know, especially before Barbossa invades Port Royal for the first time, where they capture her, scene. which is basically what jumpstarts the whole film. It's a great scene. Oh yeah, everything is so perfect in the choreography and how, like, you know, they go in and there's a great frame in the beginning where she's hiding in the closet.
Oh, and he
comes up and he's
Rigetti
like,
looks through with his eye.
That's another example of this.
Hello, Poppet.
Yeah, there's another example of this where they're using physical barriers, right, to draw focus to him and really kind of
reframe the action.
So that brings us back to this image as well. So that's a really good thing. So yeah, there's so much you could say about this film. Like, it's a great film.
And one thing, like, if this film was made today, I imagine some of the choices would be different and more inspired by other high spec films and blockbusters, the visual aesthetics, that is. Like, the blacks are pretty crushed in Pirates of the Caribbean. Things are very high contrast, and I think that really works, not just for the visual effects, but just, one, it's period accurate. You know, everything was lit by flames and lanterns, you know, and moonlight. And the moonlight is also a character in the film. You know, it is the revealing light of the pirates.
This was shot on film, right?
I think
I'm pretty sure.
Most blockbusters were still shot on film going into the early 2000s. Probably a lot more than people would realize. Film was still the best medium optically in the early 2000s.
And I mean,
digital was
like,
just coming into developing. It's still, because it's analog, right?
Yeah, because it still kind of is. I mean,
you can blow it up
to
immense sizes, immense scans.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a little off topic, but I was watching an episode of Clarice, the CBS Paramount Plus MGM show that's getting canceled.
Did you put the lotion in the basket?
So I'm watching an episode of this, right? And there's noticeable banding and dancing pixels and not even the darks, but like the darks and like the mids. Okay. So it's like, and I'm watching this on a high quality television on television broadcast, the way that sort of it's partially intended. I mean, they're going straight to streamer as well. But I mean, the fact that I'm seeing banding and dancing pixels and the fact that it was shot on Alexa Mini and Alexa LF means that we've got a long way to go. And it's like, you know, I think a lot of that is compression. Compression's the culprit, you know, but when you have as much money as CBS does to make the first season of Clarice, it's really surprising to me that, you know, that as a viewer, as just an average viewer at home, like, not only am I noticing that, but my parents are noticing it too. And, you know, I popped the DVD in for Pirates of the Caribbean, and there's absolutely no banding, no dancing pixelation, nothing.
Yeah.
Even the screenshot of this looks great.
It's and that's the thing too, is the fact that film is a little more forgiving when underexposed or overexposed. And it works very well in this case too. Not to say that it wasn't color graded or corrected. Of course it was. But the intentional choice to obscure things has the audience imagining more complexity or more unknown things, more imagination. Where maybe only a small number of elements are clearly represented. So it enhances that feeling of uncertainty and mystery throughout the whole thing. And I think this shot that we're focusing on is the prime example of all of the film's good features working for it. The obscurity of the shadows, the blue of the lighting, the gimmick of the moonlight shining on them, causing them to turn into skeletons. It all works so well. And you combine this with the music in this scene, my goodness, by Klaus Badelt and Hans Zimmer. It kind of ingeniously combines, and this is something you'll definitely have to go back and listen for, but it combines all the different themes. It combines like the swashbuckling theme that we hear earlier, the lovers theme between Will and Elizabeth. The cursed crew theme is what makes up the most of it, and then it eventually segues into the theme of the one last shot. And it is a march, like the undying skeletons. It's triumphantly and dramatically rising in this unwavering tension. This dun 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 dun, and you've got yourself the perfect summary and lead up to the climax of the film, which is right where that scene takes place.
Yeah, and it's just funny because I was just about to prompt you to talk about the music in this scene, because it is so. It's such a combination of what we've heard already, that makes it so relatable and understandable to the audience. Just when you see it and hear it, you like, oh shit, there's a battle. And
it's
coming.
Also
like,
yeah, and it's a heralding moment for the crew as well, because we cut to a side shot after this one, where we see them as men walking underwater, just regular men underneath, in the shadow of the ship, unexposed to the moonlight, kind of walking across the threshold.
There are various various close-ups after this shot to reveal
a lot of visual symbolism.
And you know what? Okay, so that's really good of the visual symbolism part. There's two things I want to get into that are that we can tie back into this image, but it's a little bit more to do with the film as a whole, which is, I think, important because we got to get to that. But before I do that, I just want to remind the audience that this podcast is sponsored by and produced by Red Curtain Entertainment. It's uploaded to RC Podcast, a subsidiary of Red Curtain Entertainment. Kevin DeReus is the executive producer. I'm the producer and host, and today we have Dylan Broda as our guest.
I'm back.
Hello.
Dylan, where can we find your work?
Oh, where can you find it? That's an excellent question. I suppose you could find some of my stuff and links to my stuff on my Instagram page at Some People's Kid.
Okay, cool. Some People's Kid.
Beyond that, I hope to share more in the form of movies that you can go and watch. but we'll get there someday.
We'll get there someday. Are you working on a project right now? There is a project, of course, that you and I are working on together that we're in the development stage on. But did you want to share a little bit about that, or do you want to keep that secret?
Well, yes, of course. Now that you've mentioned it.
Well, I could always cut it out, you know.
Well, the project that is at the center of my attention currently is a project called Recovery, which is a stop motion animation, a medium I'm particularly fond of and kind of grew up making stop motion films. And it's a story that has to deal with mental health. It's in a sci-fi post-apocalyptic setting. What's not to love?
Yeah, I mean,
I'll keep most of the plot a secret for now, as I
sounds good.
As I hope to keep most of its plot a surprise.
Yeah, and you know, I'm really excited. I read the outline, of course. Told you I would do some notes on that, which I'll do. You know, and then I'll probably have to redo the notes when you send me the first draft. But this is something we're working on, and I'm really excited about it. And yeah, I would invite the audience of Framework to just keep an eye out for Recovery. And over the course of producing episodes for Framework, I'll update the audience about how that's going. As I said, Red Curtain Entertainment is the sponsor and production company of Framework. Today we are recording outside of the studios, which are located north of Toronto, following COVID-19 guidelines.
How about
Awesome.
that?
We don't have any. I mean, that's normally where I would sort of, the 55-minute mark is normally where I would sort of do my commercials, but nobody's contacted me to do commercials because I think we only have like 40 people in our audience. So nobody cares about putting their commercial
the shameless self-plug is a welcome addition.
It's a welcome addition. Exactly. Yeah, so there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about, which I think are broad things, but I want to start with symbolism first. And of course, there are a lot of symbols. And the reason I want to start with symbolism is because you mentioned it right before we did that sponsor spot. And I want to talk about the medallion. Okay. And
the biggest symbol of them all.
I'll give you my interpretation of the medallion. And you know, I would love to hear yours and whether or not you agree or disagree with what I took from the medallion on screen. And before I get into talking about the medallion, I just want to say that there are so many movies, almost every movie that includes some kind of small form factor trinket or whatever,
cursed
or
item,
what have you,
blessing from the goddess.
Or item that provides some kind of symbolic representation or what have you. Lord of the Rings foil, with the ring is one of the biggest ones. Okay.
Save that for another podcast.
Yeah. 90 minutes of walking. Okay.
What's your interpretation? I'm interested to hear.
You know, I think a lot of people would look at the medallion and go freedom, because freedom from the curse. All right. And freedom for pirates and for people who love pirates. I think a lot of people are going to dive to that conclusion. I think that's more than valid. Okay. But I think, at least at the beginning of the film and throughout the film, okay, the medallion symbolizes two things depending on whose perspective you look at it from. Hope and despair. Okay. So hope, because it gives Barbossa's crew hope that they one day will live mortal. Because obviously they've gone through, you know, what we would normally think is beneficial, like being immortal would be great. You know, we all think immortality would be awesome until we're immortal, right?
He outlines exactly why.
He does. He outlines multiple reasons why. He talks about being in the company of a woman. He talks about eating and drinking,
Food turns to ash in our mouths.
you know, and satisfaction and dissatisfaction. And so I think for the pirates, for the cursed pirates, it represents hope because they lost it and now it's back again. And we know that it can call the pirates because we saw that at the beginning with the wave sort of going through the water and like sending that sort of signal to the Black Pearl, and how it came and decimated Port Royal and took Elizabeth Swann. So I think for the pirates, oddly enough, I mean, for the pirates, the antagonists, I guess, hope is sort of one symbolic thing that I think is represented through the medallion. The second one is despair. And I think it's despair because of how much trouble it's causing Elizabeth and Jack and Will Turner, and how, you know, this medallion could basically bring all these problems to their lives, and it does bring these problems to their lives. And it so much so that at one point Will's head is almost about to be cut off, and his blood spilt just in case, just for the lifting of this curse that the pirates got themselves into in the first place. So I think that was my interpretation this time around, and I've never really come to that conclusion because I've always looked at the medallion as freedom, and freedom sort of ties both of those things together. But I wanted to get your take on not just that, but your initial interpretation of the medallion and whether or not that's changed over time.
Yeah, well, my initial interpretation was also kind of similarly abstract as freedom, but actually I didn't come to the conclusion that it was hope or despair, though. My end interpretation of the medallion is temptation. Because no one who picks up the medallion does it inadvertently. It is a choice to pick up the medallion. It was a choice for the pirates to take the medallion, just as much as it was a choice for Elizabeth to take the medallion off of Will's neck. And it's why it's tempting. I mean, beyond the fact that it's just gold, and beyond the fact that it grants immortality. This is a curse, a side effect. They don't know it grants immortality, or at least they didn't initially. But it is the temptation. For the pirates initially, it was the temptation of what that amount of treasure could buy them. They would be free men on
which
the
got
seas
them in trouble,
for the rest of their days.
And
for which did get them in trouble, yeah. And then the temptation for Elizabeth, the temptation for something outside of her provincial life, for freedom, for adventure, the adventure she longs for, the temptation for Will, to go after the woman he loves, and the temptation for Jack to get back at Barbossa. And even in the end, it comes right down to where he says, when he takes it in his own hand and he's playing with it across his knuckles, it's like, couldn't resist, mate. I think, yeah, that is what it represents, is that temptation, but it comes at a cost. It is a lusting or longing, is what it instills, not a desire, but a longing for something, and you pay a heavy price for it. Every character who touched the medallion paid a price for it.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, that's obviously, I don't know, it's not about accuracy, but I think that's a great interpretation. I think temptation is not something that has come to mind to me before, but I think that ultimately, that might be more accurate than freedom and or hope and despair and whatever. However, with that said, of course, with the temptation comes the hope that, even though instinctually, the characters or some of the characters might already know that, with acquiring the medallion does come some sort of price. So there's sort of like every time you're tempted to do something, or every time you're tempted to grasp at the medallion and hold on to the medallion, there is that hope that there won't be a price to pay as a result of acquiring it. And 100% of the time, they're wrong, because there is a price to pay. And I think very relatable to human experience and to our experience, and I think people's experience. And I think the what makes this movie a Disney movie and a sort of like a universally understood thematic film is the fact that no matter where you come from or who you are, you can look at the medallion, and from your own perspective and from your own life, you could take something from that, And I think that's lovely, and I really connect with what you're saying, with the temptation, and I think and I think you're right, and I think to a degree we both have some interesting thoughts about the theme of this movie. And
what is your medallion, ladies and gentlemen at home listening in?
Put it in the comment section below.
What is your medallion? What is your temptation that you have paid a great sacrifice in achieving?
So, yeah, I mean, I think that's the first thing I wanted to talk about is the medallion and the symbolism and the sort of the theme. But also one of the first things they tell you in film school, and not just in film school, but probably in if you were to go to school for writing or for English or literature, is that you can't explain the theme in one word. When somebody asks you, what's your theme? And you say freedom. Well, that's
really.
kind of, that's kind of not specific. I mean, that's a concept maybe, or an idea for the base of a theme, but in this case, I think freedom, hope, despair, temptation, they all kind of tie into the medallion. I think that's wonderful, because Pirates of the Caribbean, even though it is this eccentric adventure film, can do that, and Disney's good at that. Disney does that with almost all their movies.
Yeah.
The second thing I wanted to talk about, and this will come back to the frame that we have, and not just that frame, but many others, and not just frames but shots, so over any sort of kind of duration, and this central question that framework is all about: what can one frame or shot at whatever duration tell us about the film as a whole? And that's really the question, right? And I think there are two things that cinematography and the visual language, as well as the editing, and that's kind of that ties in with the visual language, that this film that stick out, that this film does really well. And I think they're very broad, so we'll have to probably talk about how they relate to Pirates specifically, but they're motion and realization and how they tie into each other. Okay. So more often than not, with Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl, if a character is realizing something, the camera is moving. And a really good example of that is pushing in to take note of something, to call attention to it, a movement from a medium shot into a close-up. Okay? It's used to make exposition interesting and engaging, like in the famous diner scene where Elizabeth is concealing the knife to get ready to possibly kill Barbossa, right? There's a moment where he's talking about the curse and the camera moves in on him, and it pushes in to call attention to what he's saying and also make what he's saying engaging, because he's being very expository.
It's that doing multiple things at once that is, the hallmark of a good scene.
Exactly. And it happens in reverse as well. And this is an audience realization, less so of a character realization. And I'll have to find it. Let me just find it in my notes, because I want to figure out exactly Just a minute. I want to figure out exactly what Barbosa says. They're coming to an agreement, and Barbosa says, "Agreed." And he steps towards the camera.
Well, I'm not sure he says it like agreed.
Yeah, I don't think he says it like
More
that
like
either.
agreed.
Yeah, like that. Exactly. Yeah, but he says that, and then he steps towards the camera. So it's kind of like a reverse of like the camera moving in, but him stepping towards. So motion can refer to how the camera is moving, but also how the things in the scene are moving, right? And in the frame that you chose, I'm not sure if there's much camera movement, but there's definitely a lot of movement in this sequence. They're progressing forward towards
definitely
their goal of taking a walk, which means more than just walking, right? So
yeah. It means a lot more than just walking. There and the movement too, as I mentioned earlier, is in that slow motion, which for all other, I think the only other slow motion parts or cinematography in the film is reserved for shots of the medallion, like the medallion being dropped, the medallion falling, the medallion floating in the water. Besides maybe, I think, the flag, like the black flag at the beginning unfurling when the wind changes in Port Royal. I think that was also in slow motion, but perhaps not. But I think that says something as well that the filmmakers were trying to achieve was the ethereal, or slow motion was used to explain the ethereal, or was used to show the unreal or the supernatural elements best. And I think using that one shot in the film also as slow motion parallels with the shot we get at the beginning of the film where the medallion is around Elizabeth's neck after she's fallen off the platform below near the rocks into the water, and the medallion floats up slowly and it releases that pulse. You can just kind of imagine these skeletons walking across the ocean floor in search of the medallion, which actually brings me to an interesting point, which is something I've always wondered. This scene is actually a bit of a plot hole. Or is it? Decide for yourself. So earlier at the beginning of the film, shortly after Elizabeth is captured and brought on board the Black Pearl because she's using the name Turner. In her negotiations with Barbosa and the pirates, she threatens to drop the medallion over the side of the boat into the harbor below. And she teases this by releasing just a little bit, but still holding onto the chain. And then they're all like, no, they were worried she was going to drop it. But why?
Why are they worried?
Surely why are they worried? They're not afraid of going down into the water. They can survive underwater. They can feel its presence. They're drawn to it. So it being dropped in the water is not it wouldn't be an actual threat to them. They could easily retrieve it because we see them walking beneath the seafloor later in the film. That begs the question, why did the filmmakers leave that there, or why did they choose to do that? Because it would be a bit of a plot hole. That is the whole motivation for Elizabeth's negotiation. Well, I think that one, it sets up that the pirates aren't really negotiating with Elizabeth. They're kind of playing her. And two, their reaction is visceral more than logical. They are connected to the curse, and so of course they're going to have a dramatic reaction whenever they might lose the gold, even if they know that they can get it back. So knowing that, I think that's a fun choice, because at the beginning we think that, she's negotiating, she's got him. But then later, we realize that their reaction to it being dropped was almost like an invisible set of strings attached to them. And as soon as she dropped it, it started pulling them towards it. It's almost like as soon as it was leaving their hands, they were ready to jump on it. I think that's a fun thing, because if it's not a plot hole, again, decide for yourself, then it's not of any great consequence to the film as a whole. But if it is a plot hole, then it's not of any great consequence to the film as a whole. But if it's not a plot hole, as I don't think it is, then it's a very clever and intentional use of blocking and action, as well as world building, all in one little quick scene of the teasing of the drop of the medallion.
That's an interesting. I love that scene.
Yeah,
just the sound of like the medallion kind of partially coming out of her hand.
Oh yeah, the
cut to a close up almost of kind of a cut to a close up. But yeah, no, I love this scene. And it see what you said sort of begs a question in me a little bit. About the world.
Mm-hmm.
Because who's to say that they're immortal, or like that the effects of the immortality are during the daytime? Because the moon comes out and there's a big emphasis on the moon and the moonlight, and that's when we sort of see that the curse affects them in terms of their body physically. So that begs the question, like, in daytime, could they walk under the water? Or, even though they can't be killed, do they have those other abilities? Like, how far does the world building sort of go, right?
I would say yes. And there's a few reasons why. First is we see that Barbossa gets stabbed in the chest with a knife by Elizabeth, and it does nothing. He doesn't bleed.
Yeah.
There's also in the scene that we're talking about, when they go under the boat, we see them as normal human beings in the shadow of the moon. But as soon as they step back out into the direct moonlight, then they're skeletons again. I think they still are prone to damage, like how Will throws I believe it's an axe at the one guy and he gets concussed, or it gets stuck in his back, but it's nothing of extended consequence. They always seem to come back.
Right.
And also we know from when the governor is trapped in the drawing room of the Dauntless, and the hands are coming in, and he manages to break off one of the hands because it's pulling his wig, and he puts the hand in a drawer and locks it in the drawer, which is a great little funny scene. But the hand keeps moving and thumping around after it's been severed from the body, which says that even when they are broken apart, they're not exactly dead. So hopefully that kind of, I think, answers the question you had about the world there. But there is another interesting plot hole, and this one I am more convinced is a plot hole. But feel free to take a contrary opinion. Why isn't Elizabeth a skeleton? You must wonder, because she has in her possession the medallion, and we know that you don't necessarily have to have it on your person, as the pirates certainly didn't. The Pirates of the Black Pearl certainly didn't. They had them, most of them, in a chest at Isla de Muerta. But it was the fact that they had taken them and hadn't given them all back with the blood repaid that they were still cursed. So anybody else who would take one is also cursed. It could be argued that because it was given to Will by his father, and then that it might not have cursed him. But Elizabeth did then steal it from William. And she does explain later in her defense that she did this because she was afraid of what they might do to him if they found out he was a pirate. But it was also selfishness on her own part. Again, it was that temptation. It was a pirate medallion. She wanted to know what it was like to be a pirate. And she even, later in the film, she's wearing it. But for much of the film, actually, she's wearing it. So why isn't she cursed? Why doesn't she share the curse? She took it from someone, maybe perhaps not from the island itself, but she did take it, and it is in her possession. And we know that even if it's taken indirectly, it still affects the bearer or the taker. In the case of Jack the Monkey, for instance, who is an undead monkey for all of the movie and for the rest of the series, in fact, as a running gag, because the monkey took a medallion and has it in its possession, which is why it is also undead. So it begs the question, why isn't Elizabeth undead?
Yeah, so I mean there's probably somebody out there, like, who's more equipped to answer this than I am. I think you sort of answered it. Like, I think you sort of answered why it's possible that why she is not undead is because of not how she acquired it, but how Will acquired it. And then it's not until it returns to the possession of Captain Barbossa that it actually becomes effective again, I guess. That she took it out of fear that he was a pirate, which is untrue.
Yeah.
And I guess you could make the argument that Will is a pirate by blood.
Oh, yeah. Well, he is a pirate or his father was a pirate, and that was what Captain Jack Sparrow was trying to beat into his head at the beginning of the film. Was he could still be a good man even if he was a pirate, or even if he had a father for a pirate. Yeah, it's nice that the movie comes full circle, and at the end, where Elizabeth's father's like, "Well, are you sure this is what you want? He is a blacksmith," and then she goes, "No, he's a pirate." Well, they all get what they wanted in the end, don't they?
Yeah, and I mean, further to that, her father also says, sometimes the pirate way is the way, right? Like, so that's also really, I think, interesting.
And this is, of course, straying away from the original frame that we were talking about.
Let's bring it back really quickly to the original frame, just to kind of talk about maybe how some of this relates to the original frame, because we're at an hour and 25 minutes, so we just got to wrap it up. But we can definitely schedule another Pirates of the Caribbean conversation.
Oh yeah, I mean, I could talk about all 4 of the movies.
I know,
and there are only 4. The 5th one doesn't exist because it's terrible.
I started watching the 5th one, and 20 minutes in, I turned it off.
What 5th one?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was on Netflix. I was watching it on Netflix, and I turned it off. If I went to the theater to watch the non-existent 5th Pirates of the Caribbean movie, it would have been the first movie that I walk out of. That's how bad it was. That is how unimpressed I was about the first 20 minutes of that non-existent movie.
Yeah. Well, my sister and I certainly were tempted to, had we not been in the company of our parents as well when we went and saw this in theaters.
Right.
This non-existent movie, of course. It was already sad at how overstretched the franchise was becoming due to Disney's own greed for treasure. But that being said, the 4th one, none of them from the 1st, 2nd to the 3rd, and the 4th will ever be as good as the 1st.
No, the 1st, and that's why we're talking about
this one.
The 1st was magic
was lightning in a bottle. and that's why, you know, there's so much to talk about.
Honestly.
But the second and third and even the fourth were good continuations of the story and its characters. The fifth was a complete bastardization, with a new, you know, even more characters and new writers, new directors. Like, it changed hands, and it basically was almost like a fan movie of people who grew up watching the original and then tried to make their own spin of it. And they completely ruined Jack Sparrow's character as well as Barbossa's character, and they also kind of they did something terrible, which is they removed the meaning from everything, from all of the past movies. They deflated the meaning by involving Greek mythology for some reason and creating a magic MacGuffin that undoes all curses. You know, that's something you see in like a children's cartoon, not a movie, not a blockbuster feature. That's a pretty weak device. And for them to do that,
cheap way out, yeah.
For them to do that at, you know, basically destroying all of the magic of the series, from the undead pirates to Davy Jones to the Kraken to the Locker. All of that is moot now because they could have just got this this trident of Poseidon, and somehow that has the Greek trident of Poseidon has an effect on, you know, all of the other pagan gods of the sea. I don't know. Permit me to doubt. But again, that movie doesn't exist.
Yeah. It really doesn't.
There's so many other issues I have with it that I can't even begin. But that might be a fun talk as well one day, just shitting on the non-existent fifth Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah, and if we do that, I'll have to actually go and like watch the whole thing. So
but this frame from this movie is one to remember, and it's one that I believe a lot of people, when they think of Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl, they think of this scene, or they come back to this scene because it's so impactful. It stays with you.
Yeah, and for so many reasons, right?
Yeah.
Oh.
It really, if you were to use one scene from the movie in the trailer, that's the one I would do, because it doesn't reveal anything, but it introduces you that they're everything you need to know.
Yeah,
it gives you the threat. The threat becomes very real.
And I mean, it also sort of it also kind of just says like, hey, like, I mean, like,
it just says, like, hey.
It basically, see, you know what, without actually putting that line of dialogue into the trailer, like, this shot and scene is basically the essence of Barbossa's line, "You best start believing in ghost stories because you're in one," you know?
Oh, yeah.
Like, if there's one scene or sequence that kind of shows that the best, it's the sequence that comes after that line of dialogue, but also this one.
But also this one, yeah.
But also this one. So, I think you're right. I think if you were to do like a 30 to 45 second teaser trailer for Instagram, you know, like nowadays, this is a perfect scene, you know, with the music and like some sound and oh yeah, it'd be great.
There's something, the thing about this scene is it takes a beat all unto itself. Not a lot of movies do that so much, at least in the West. I find many Japanese and other foreign films, but particularly, you know, the works of you know, like Akira and the stuff by Miyazaki, and even, you know, the earlier Japanese works like Kurosawa, they all take moments to establish setting, tension, and world just by observing, just by being. You know, they show these scenes without dialogue, or just these establishing scenes, or scenes where it's just an army marching across a field, or in the case of like Throne of Blood, it's the trees marching towards him. Those things we often, and what I mean by over in the West is we often in Hollywood are always cut to action, action. And this, while this is technically action, that I would argue that it's more of a scenic moment. We are, helpless observers underwater as this scene is unfolding before us, and it gives us a moment to appreciate everything that's happening and everything that's come before, as both the music and the visuals remind us of the stakes of the stakes and the plot of the film, and it builds us perfectly. It creates a moment of rising tension right before the actual climax, whereas many other movies would have either a slower start, gradually just kind of cutting into the action of the climax, or just kind of abruptly, from one action to the other, boom, now we're in the climax. Taking this moment not only gives the characters their due screen time, but it also gives the audience that moment of awe, that moment of going, whoa. And that's what I love about cinema. That's when it takes you out of your seat and puts you in the movie.
Yeah, and you know what? Like Dylan, that was such a fantastic way to conclude this episode. I think you wrapped it up like a present on Christmas morning. That was really beautiful. And you know what? I think the only thing that I will say is I love cinema for some of the same reasons. As I said in episode 1, if you were there in episode 1, I really do believe that cinema is the closest thing to real magic. And we experience it every time we watch a great film. And while there are a lot of subjective elements and interpretation involved in art, not just film, but art, we know when we see a bad movie. And this is not a bad movie. And I really do believe that film is, the closest thing to real magic. And I really just hope that over the course of our careers that we can produce something of this scale, this scope, this quality, and have it be seen by a large audience, unlike this podcast, unfortunately. Hopefully we'll kind of gain an audience, and we'll build an audience. And I really want to thank you very much for coming today on Discord to record.
Thank you for having me.
And,
all we can do is try to make our frames work.
That's right. Just a reminder, just to talk a little briefly, just before we hit the record button one more time to end the recording. I just want to say thank you very much to the audience that does listen and watch on YouTube, and hopefully will move over and or stay on YouTube, because we will continue to upload to YouTube as
you are most appreciated.
Yeah, as we start using some streaming platforms. I just want to say thank you very much for everybody's involvement so far, as this is our 3rd episode. If you want to watch or listen to an episode about Scott Pilgrim versus the World, you can go back and listen to episode 2. Joker is episode 1, featuring Robin Johnston. Episode 2 features Kevin Drews. Those are great films and some good discussions. So go check those out. If you have already, I hope you'll stay with us for the rest of our journey in Framework. Framework is a film-centric podcast featuring various young filmmakers as they talk about how a single frame relates to the bigger picture. Producers, writers, directors, and cinematographers break down films and dig deeper into the art form as a medium for storytelling in this modern world. And what a world it is, of pirates and more pirates. Thanks, Dylan, so much for being here. If there's anything else you want to add to this podcast, feel free. Otherwise, we'll call it a day.
Thanks for having me. It's been wonderful talking.
It has been great, and hopefully we can have you again, maybe to shit on Pirates 5.
Bring me that horizon.
All right, thanks, Dylan.
And really bad eggs.
Okay, cue music.
Drink up me hearties, yo ho.